All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our talk about how movies can help you write a really powerful personal statement. Um, First, just kind of an explanation of why I chose this topic and why it will hopefully be interesting to you. I work with a lot of clients who, for example, maybe come from a STEM background or they don't have necessarily a ton of writing experience. And a lot of times it's difficult to explain to someone using kind of classical literature or English composition how to go about constructing an essay or what you should put in an essay. And I've often found that the best way to do it is to use a slightly different kind of storytelling, which is the kind that you'll see in movies. And so, if I can show you how a couple of different movies use these techniques, that hopefully you will see that they can be really powerful ways of storytelling. Before I get started, though, make sure that you like the video. And if you're not already a member or a follower, go ahead and subscribe to GMAT Club so you can stay up to date with all the great stuff that they're doing, especially this time of year when they have a pretty packed calendar and lots of great videos that different people like me put on the YouTube page and other places. Who am I? I'm Brian Fobi. I'm the CEO of Gurufi. We're a company. All that we do, we specialize in helping applicants with the written portions of their applications. That is CVs, but mostly personal statements. Every year we help clients get into top schools. The last couple of days have been really cool for us because Stanford has started to release its list of admittees, and so we're getting a lot of clients who've gotten good news from Stanford and also HBS. We have a long track record that goes back to 2008. I guess that's 15 years. Makes me feel old. But anyway, if you have questions, feel free to hop on gurufi.com or send an email to me at service@gurufi.com. All right. Now, why would movies help you with your personal statement? Uh, the biggest and most important piece of advice when you were writing a personal statement is that a personal statement for an MBA application, um, it's about storytelling, right? A lot of times people will get tripped up and they'll feel like what they need to do is have almost like a narrative version of their CV where they've got to keep it jam packed full of every accomplishment they've done. And they need to come across as like this amazing superstar. And that's not really what a personal statement is, nor should it be like how you view it. A good personal statement, an effective personal statement, a winning personal statement tells your story. And storytelling being central to what a good personal statement is and does, you should think carefully and in depth about the kind of story that you want to tell about yourself. And as I noted beforehand, a lot of times people struggle if they don't come from a writing background to tell stories. And a good way to access or a good way to think about stories is to look at the movie industry. Movies do a great job of using storytelling structures to make you feel, think, and understand and care about people and things. And for every good personal statement, there's this kind of mix of the reader needs to kind of feel like they know you, but they also need to understand the basic beats of your story. And so, um, thinking about your personal statement almost like a movie script in some ways or a movie outline can be a very useful way of approaching or critiquing a draft of a personal statement that you've put together. And the last point that I'll say there is everybody watches movies. Almost everyone, basically. So it's a useful tool for thinking about how you can improve your storytelling. So if I were to tell you, um, use these writing techniques that Jane Austen or Hemingway or even Shakespeare used. A lot of people don't have much history with those books, and so that might not be very useful. But in terms of helping you understand what you can do to write a better personal statement, using movie examples can be a great way. And before I go any further, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop in and comment, and I'll try to answer them along the way. All right. So I've picked five movies, and kind of the lessons that they will provide, that they will teach. to guide you as you write your personal statement. All right. Movie number one is Rocky. All right. Um, the thing that's interesting about Rocky is that people always forget that Rocky actually lost the fight. Um, Subsequent Rocky movies, he always wins, right? But the first Rocky movie, the one the Oscar, the one that made Sylvester Stallone famous, Rocky lost, right? But people loved him as a hero because he showed grit. He became a better person and a kinder person by the end of the movie than he was at the start of the movie. And so, even though the movie ends with him losing a hard fought boxing match against Apollo Creed, spoiler alert for this movie from 1979, um, his journey and not the destination are what people loved about the character. And if people are familiar with the movie, one of the kind of funny things to do is to ask people, like, "Hey, in the first Rocky, who won the fight?" Almost everyone will say, "Oh yeah, Rocky won." He didn't. He lost. I promise you that that's the case. And the lesson that you can obviously get from this is that your personal statement does not always have to be about you winning, winning, winning. In fact, approaching loss and difficulty and setbacks in your personal statement can be a really great way to explain your journey, to explain your life, to explain your values in a way that will connect with the reader. So, how can you use this in your personal statement? There's two different ways to think about this. The first is that some schools will require or they will ask you to write about a setback or a failure. That is a specific prompt that some MBA applications have. If this is the case, then you should obviously write about a setback or failure. And I did a whole video about that about a year ago for GMAT Club. Um, but the more important thing than maybe the failure that you chose is to embrace the idea of grit, fighting through and becoming a better person. So it's kind of like the failure is the one thing. What the essay is really asking you is, how did you respond to the failure? And so, as you go through it, explain specifically why you stumbled, but also make sure that you leave the reader at the end with the sense that this setback, this failure made you a better person, that you were tougher, smarter, had a clearer sense of yourself, that you had grown in some important way at the end of this episode than at the beginning of it. Secondly, many people will write about a setback in their personal statement, even if the prompt does not specifically ask for it. And that's not only okay, that's actually can frequently be a really good idea. Um, it doesn't have to be a personal statement doesn't just have to be your greatest wins. Using a loss to talk about growth and what matters to you and your future can help you to come across as human and compelling and humble. What you don't want is kind of a pitiful story where you're just losing, losing, losing. And at the end, you say, well, like, life beat me up. No, every essay needs to ultimately be optimistic and kind of forward looking so that the reader feels like what it is that you are conveying to them is still ultimately a positive message and an optimistic message, and they're excited about what comes next, even though you did have this setback. And as I say here, keep in mind the frame or the lens that you want to view this through, which is that losing can be the start of many wonderful sequels. That is, just because you had a setback does not mean you're going to continue to. And you can talk about how this setback set you up for subsequent successes. All right. So that's how Rocky and the idea of losing or the idea of loss and setback can help you in your personal statement. So, movie number two, um, The Avengers. And the lesson here is make your villain big, bad, and daunting. Now, let me tell you what I'm not talking about. What I don't mean is like a literal villain where, like, Sally from accounting or something is this person who, you have some beef with. And so you have to destroy her. I'm talking much more kind of metaphorical. So if you had a big challenge at work, or there's some difficult thing in the world of business or entrepreneurship, or There's a problem out in the world that you want to encounter and overcome. Or if you were talking about an important accomplishment along the way, then you need to make sure that the reader understands the difficulty of what you undertook and the stakes involved. Okay, so just to explain for people who don't watch comic book movies, the producers of the Avengers, if you remember, they teased the existence of Thanos, who was kind of this big bad guy, um, in multiple movies, sort of these end post-credit scenes that Marvel loves to do. And at the start of one of the Avengers movies, they show him easily beating up the Hulk. And in fact, at the end of part one of Avengers, um, he had actually won, right? Like his big thing was to destroy half the universe, and he did that. And so it was clear that that he was a formidable foe. And people who watched the movies would ask, like, how can the good guys possibly win? The viewers understood the stakes, which is that if Thanos wins, all of these billions of people will be gone forever, and that would be a catastrophe. All right. So, what does that tell you about how you can approach your personal statement? Um, for every task, for every accomplishment or difficulty that you write about in your personal statement, there's some questions that you should ask, and there's some ways that you should seek to frame those things. So first, ask, why was this thing hard? Right? So if you talk about a task that you were given, so you're a consultant at BCG or something, and you're given a specific assignment, to yourself, ask yourself, why was this hard? Ask, why was it important? A good way of figuring out why something was important is to ask, what would have happened if I had failed? And what was the benefits of my success? And so you can look at those two things, failure and success, and look at the delta between them and say, that's why it was important, right? That this big company would have lost X amount of dollars or suffered some catastrophe if I hadn't succeeded. But instead, they found a new business line, and they were able to, find success in that way. Um, the other question to ask is, what did it take for you to succeed? So talk specifically about the choices that you made and the actions that you took, right? And that as you write about it, one of the things that can be really helpful to identify in order to, quote, make your villain big, that is to make it clear that what you did was exceptional, was to focus on moments when success was in doubt, was in jeopardy. And so if you think about this in a lot of movies, a good movie will bring you to a point where it seems like the good guys can't win. Right? If you ever watch a bad action movie, for example, a bad action movie is frequently where the guy just kind of goes through and he can beat up everybody, and it's never really a challenge. And that's not compelling, right? And so in your personal statement, you want to make sure, in an honest way, of course, you want to stay true to the actual facts, but that you make it clear to the reader why something was substantial, why it was hard, why it was important, and what the stakes were. What would have happened if you had failed? A couple of things to avoid when you're telling these stories and you're trying to build up the quote unquote villain. What you don't want to do is to get too bogged down in technical details. A lot of times, if people work in a particular industry, they will want to fill their descriptions and their personal statements with all kinds of minutia. So for example, if you work at BMW, you might go into depth about the different brake parts, and like this part had to work with here, and we had to get this supplier. Think in terms of what it is that the reader needs to know in order to understand. And a lot of times that's not these minute technical details. And a lot of times that will just simply lose the reader. Like I'm not actually interested in BMW brakes. And so your story has bored me. But if you had told it from the point of view of, we had to fix this braking issue because there were safety concerns, and that was the thing, I don't need to know what type of asbestos was being used on the brakes, right? I just need to know what the stakes were. In a similar way, a lot of times applicants will focus on a dollar amount and think that that in itself is sufficient to explain something. So they'll have a line where they'll say, I worked on a $150 million M&A, and then they'll just move on to the next thing. Like, okay, if you take that story, that kind of mini story, say I worked on $150 million M&A, and that's really all you give the reader, versus one where you say you worked on a $10 million M&A, but you talked in detail about why it was challenging, what you learned from it, how it almost failed, how it taught you important lessons. That's a way better story, even though the first number is so much bigger. It's not just about the dollar amount that's going to blow the reader's mind. Okay. Um, Third point here is try to paint a picture of you. Don't rather paint a picture of yourself where you're just knocking down every obstacle as if it was nothing. Um, if you do that, what it's not going to show that you're like this amazing dude who can, um, conquer everything. What it's going to show, or how the reader will interpret it, is like you haven't done anything very difficult, or you haven't tested yourself. If you've wanted everything, you know, it makes it seem like you've just been playing in the minor leagues. Um, which is the final point there. Story without a compelling villain won't make you seem amazingly strong. It will make it seem like you never faced actual hardship. So do dedicate some time and some energy to making sure that as you construct and explain the problems that you've overcome, that you make it clear to the reader why it was such a big deal, why it was difficult, and how it forced you to grow, learn, and adapt. All right. Third movie here, Star Wars. Now, this is something that many people are familiar with, the idea of the hero's two journeys. And so I'll sort of explain it briefly. There's this guy, Joseph Campbell, who talks about this. And it can be a useful way of thinking about your personal statement, because a personal statement, also a good one, will also have kind of these two parallel journeys. So one is a very literal journey, like what were you doing, and where are you going, right? And the second one is your personal journey. Who did you become along the way? And so if you think about this in the context of Star Wars, right? So Luke Skywalker, the things that he actually did was that he leaves his planet Tatooine. He goes around the galaxy. He destroys two Death Stars. He kills Emperor Palpatine. He saves his father. He saves the galaxy. That's what he did, right? But he also had a personal journey. And that is that Luke went from kind of a frustrated farm boy to a Jedi Knight. And that who he was at the beginning of the movie is a very different person than he was at the end of Return of the Jedi. And you can see that change happening over the course of that story. So how does that help you with your personal statement? Yes, obviously your personal statement needs to include your accomplishments, especially those things that you're really proud of and that you feel like shines a compelling light on you as a person and an applicant. But you also need to make clear how you've grown as a result. So if you undertook some difficult thing, um, at the end of that thing that you did, or at the end of that big accomplishment, hopefully you are a different and better person, right? You've learned something, you've gained some skill, you have a sense of clarity about what you would like to do in the next part of your life or career. Um, these are substantial changes. And so a good way to think about it is, like, you can even take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle and say, who was I at the start of this personal statement? Who was I at the end? And look at that transformation and make sure that that is conveyed, so that if you, for example, went from someone who just wanted to do management consulting, but you've now shifted to a place where you want to work more in the management of charities or something like that, then, like, how did that happen? um, Make sure that it's clear that you've undergone a personal transformation that is not just a list of accomplishments that you've had. If you show growth and momentum, it makes it easier for the admissions committee to embrace the idea that you have potential, right? So another way of thinking about that is, if you start, your personal statement here, but then by the end of it, you're like over here, right? You've gone up, then the reader can extrapolate from that and say, oh, she has a lot more, she's on her way up, right? As opposed to, just a flat line where you are who you're going to be, which is not what you want to convey in your personal statement. You want to have this sense of growth and momentum and optimism because personal statements are ultimately about the future. All right. The fourth is Lord of the Rings. And if you watched any of the videos I've done recently, you know that I talk a lot about this we, not me. And I think that The Lord of Rings as a movie or series of movies does a really good job of doing that. So, again, um, in this movie, you're talking about an ordinary person or an ordinary hobbit, and they have an extraordinarily difficult task to complete. But he doesn't just do it on his own, he does it with his friends, and there are kind of multiple people along the way who are helping him. And accomplishing this task requires teamwork and collaboration. And it's ultimately not a story about Frodo being some, super powerful or magical being. It's about a group of people who go on a journey together and accomplish something. So, how does that help you? Um, if you want to convey leadership or collaboration, think about we, right? Um, a good test, incidentally, is when you were writing about some story or something that you did, something you feel proud of, look at it and ask, are you the only person who's in that story? Um, because if you are, you should at least think about how you can add other people in it so that you're not the only kind of named character in that story. Because you can't demonstrate leadership or collaboration if you're the only person, right? There's no such thing as being a leader when you're the only person there, right? So a leader without followers is just a man on a walk. Um, and so you need to not just have other people in it, but show instances of you leading or collaborating with others. Show yourself empowering people. Include maybe moments where you found ways to position people for success, or you relied on other people's talents or advice or insight. And show yourself as someone who is not just on a journey alone, but as someone who can and does collaborate. And so this "we, not me" is this mantra that the dean at Duke Fuqua um, loves to talk about. Is something that they specifically look for in their applications. And it's a good test that you can apply, is to ask yourself, is this entire essay just me, 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 and I'm showing up in every scene and just dominating and being the best and smartest and most effective person in the room? Or is this a story of me encountering situations with other people and finding ways to collectively overcome them? This is especially true if key themes of your essay are that you want to be a leader or that you are a leader. You've got to show those things, right? People always say in writing, show, don't tell. You've got to show yourself leading. You got to show yourself collaborating. Um, and that's obviously like uh, something a lesson that you can draw from the Lord of the Rings. All right. Lastly, Titanic, right? Every teenage girl's favorite movie. Um, the important thing here are the ideas to bring everything full circle. And what do I mean by that? There, you will find so much stuff online about how to write a great introduction. As an aside, I think most of it is bad. People rely too much on gimmicks, etc. Whatever, we can talk about that another time. But people don't talk enough about how you end your essay. And as a result, people just kind of assume that how you end an essay is, one of these terrible paragraphs that begins with something like "in conclusion, dot, dot, dot." Um, Let me just tell you, any paragraph that begins with in conclusion is just another way of telling the reader, you can stop reading now. The real essay is done. Okay. So never, ever use that phrase. So if you remember Titanic at the end, the movie doesn't just seek to recap, right? It provides meaning for Rose and Jack's story. It shows, the future that Rose had after the sinking of the ship, showing growth and transformation, and that she honored her commitment to Jack to live a full life. Spoiler alert again for a 30-year-old movie, but Leo sinks because the wooden board isn't apparently big enough. And at the very end of the movie ends with Jack and Rose reunited in the ship's grand staircase, and it's kind of a nod back to an earlier scene. And so it does a really nice job of kind of bringing everything full circle and not just kind of ending, right? And so, how can this help you? Oops, looks like the formatting is a bit wonky. Um, in your essay, uh, it's important that you don't just have a recap or kind of a messy wrap up. Um, the best conclusions to a personal statement do a couple of things. One, they're more focused on the future, right? So you talk about like, look, if I get into Stanford X Y Z, I will be in position to do X, Y, and Z or something like that. Second, it should give a sense of what you value and aspire to be, um, and it should strike an optimistic tone, right? Like if there's kind of a word or a phrase or idea that I want you to apply to your conclusion, it's optimistic. You want to be leaning into the idea of like, look, there's these great things ahead for me, and I'm really anxious to do them. And if you let me into school X, I can accomplish that. And lastly, in much the same way that the final scene in Titanic sort of brings these characters back sort of from the dead to have this final scene, one of the ways that you can write an effective conclusion is to take your introduction and find specific words, phrases, and ideas and stick those in the conclusion. And what that does is it sort of subconsciously gives the reader a sense of conclusion that you're bringing back things that you started with, and it helps them to feel and understand that the essay is over. And it's over by hitting on a high note and coming full circle. Um, the big lessons here: care about storytelling. Your personal statement ultimately is about telling your story, your accomplishments, and your personal growth. Uh, have a great supporting cast, right? Make sure that you show yourself collaborating with and interacting with other people. Have a villain, right? Again, not a person per se, but rather a difficult thing that you face down, and make sure that the reader really feels and understands why it was a difficult thing to accomplish or overcome. Um, and way too many people care about opening with a bang, but the ending is actually way more important. The other thing I would just add, as since we're talking about movies, I'll call this the DVD extras, right? If any of you are old enough to remember when there were DVDs, I guess Blu-rays exist now, and you can find these deleted scenes. Um, Deleted scenes in movies is a good way of thinking about your personal statement. Most revision, so you have a draft, you've written your draft, almost everybody writes it too long. So if you have a 900 word cap, you've written 1300 words and you got to cut stuff. That's a lot like editing a movie, actually. And the best way that you can improve an essay is to make it shorter. So understand, though, that there's going to be scenes or things in your essay that actually don't really fit in with the story or the theme that you're trying to build. And as much as it hurts you, you probably need to cut those out. You talk to any movie director, they'll tell you, oh, I wish I could have stuck this scene in, but it didn't really work. And it's the same thing with a personal statement. Understand that shorter makes your essay better. That's the biggest thing that people who are not experienced writers get wrong. They think, I just got to add more stuff. No, cut more stuff. You're cutting out the clutter. Same thing with a movie. No one wants to watch a 9-hour movie, right? Cut it down so it's really punchy and clear. And if you don't have a reason for it to be in your essay, if you can't justify it, then it should go. All right. So, like I said, I hope that this has been a useful way for you to think about how you can tell a compelling story um, in your essay, and that you can see in not just these movies, but a lot of different movies, how these basic tools for storytelling can help to make your essay better, right? The same things that make for a great movie, is counterintuitive as it might be, a lot of those same things also help to make a really great personal statement. So if you use these same kind of tricks or tips and insights, you can build a personal statement that ends up being a lot more interesting and compelling, and that reflects and tells your story in a way that's kind of true to the best of what you've experienced. Again, if you have any questions, shoot me an email at service@gurufi.com. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I'm happy to stay here for a bit and answer any questions that anyone has about either these topics generally or anything um, with respect to uh, writing a personal statement. If you have questions, just drop it there in the chat. All right. Uh, yep. You says you have a question. Shoot. Just waiting for. I think Garov. Is that how you pronounce that? Is writing out their question. Great endings for personal statements. Yeah. It's hard for me to give examples in the sense of like, here's a personal statement that ends well. But let me tell. I can kind of tell you about what you want to do in a personal statement to make it end well. One, um, typically what happens, right, and most personal statements is kind of the standard formatting is that there's like the first two-thirds of the essay or so will be your story, and then a lot of times people will have a little section in there. Well, they'll talk about like, here's why I want to go to Anderson Business School or whatever, um, and then like they'll wrap it up. Okay, now in that wrap it up paragraph, as I noted before, the thing you don't want to do is say like in conclusion or to say like here's the 3 points that I made. I would be great for your school because of X, Y, and Z. Don't do that. A good way to approach it would be to think about like what is the overarching theme. So if, for example, you want to earn an MBA to advance some type of public service there that you're interested in, um, ask yourself, why is that important to you? What would be the positive outcome of you achieving this goal? So, for example, you could say, um, you know, uh, I've worked as a management consultant, but um, having seen the positive impact that improving, water treatment infrastructure can have on the lives of children, I'm dedicated to improving the lives of children in my home country of X. Um, Nothing has a more profound impact on a country than the health and vibrancy of its next generation. Um, with an MBA from Stanford or whatever, I can achieve this goal, right? And so the idea is that you're positioning yourself as like this is this is the springboard that I'm attempting to achieve. And then in that final paragraph, make sure that you look back at your introductory paragraph. And if, for example, you opened with a story, right? So let's say you opened with the story of, the first time that you encountered children drinking unpotable water, you could return to that story and, maybe drop, say, 7 years ago, I encountered children drinking unpotable water that made them sick. I now have the tools, or I now know where I can acquire the tools to help these types of people, right? Um, and you can then move from there. And so the idea is that you're connecting it to your introduction, and you're also looking forward. We're saying like, look, if I get this MBA, I'm going to be able to accomplish this specific goal. And so that's kind of how you should view it, and not just as I've got to like repeat the four things that are the main points of my essay. And so that's how I would think about doing that. Um, okay, so um, Garoff is asking, says he comes from IT sector, 5 years experience. While writing my essays, I feel that my professional instances are not impactful or that unique. And while I have good exposure to different domains, since IT sector and does not add for diversified profiles, a little challenging for me. Okay, so I actually did a video, I guess, last Monday with an Indian IT professional who's at Harvard Business School now, and we talked specifically about this issue of how do you navigate your application and your personal statement when you are and you feel like you are from an overrepresented demographic, right? Uh, the There's not really like a trick here. So let me tell you kind of the process or what you have to go through. First, think about like in your 5 years that you've been working in this sector, what are the biggest challenges you faced? Um, when did you come closest to failure? Um, what things have inspired you about your job? What things have aggravated you about your work? In what ways have you felt limited? Um, are there competencies that you've developed that you feel like if you had a little bit more skill or knowledge, you could bring genuine improvement to either some sector or industry or like a group of people or an area, right? You have to start thinking in terms of getting down to the nitty gritty of what you offer. Like, what is your story? Um, and then on the flip side, you have to start to develop a clear sense of what your future is. And so, what is it that you want to accomplish? What is it that you want to achieve? What is it that you need to know and learn in order to achieve that? And how can a particular business school help you? Um, now, um, if in fact, right, so let me just preface this by saying this. I work with a lot of clients, and most of them begin with the belief that there's nothing interesting about what they do or what they hope to do. If you talk to someone for 5 or 10 minutes, we do hour-long consultations. You can start to pull out things that are interesting and unique about them. So my guess is that you're probably understating the things that make you unique and interesting, and that's what you have to mine, right? Whether it's you work with someone like me, or you just sit down with your friends and say, what do you think is interesting about my story and my life? What interesting skills do I have? What makes me unusual? Um, take the time to actually sit down and write down, in 5 years I want to, in 10 years I want to, right? Develop these things in a concrete way so that you can build an essay that shows that you are unique, because ultimately, yeah, on the surface of it, you do fit into kind of an overcrowded demographic, and so you have to differentiate yourself. But that's true of all applicants to lesser or greater degrees. You've got to go through this process of figuring out what your goal is and then working to make that compelling. Now, a lot of that does come down to storytelling, um, but it also comes down to, like, for lack of a better phrase, you got to kind of mine your heart and figure out the thing that lights your fire and say, this is what I really want to do, right? Um, the best essays, the best personal statements, oftentimes you leave them with a sense of like, um, if I don't accomplish this, I won't have achieved the thing that I want to do in life, right? It's got to be clear, like, this is the thing I want, right? I want to work in this industry and I want to like lead it in this direction. That's what's got to be in there. Um, and so, the different experiences that you have are useful. That's part of it. But remember that a lot of the MBA application is figuring out how to project forward, right? They need to see the version of you in 10 years, and it needs to be kind of a compelling and interesting version of you. And so, without sitting down and talking to you at length, it's hard to say exactly what that is. But most people have that thing. And if you want to be competitive at the better schools, you've got to go through the work of finding that and making it clear exactly what you hope to do and become. And yeah, so you say your professional instances are not impactful or that unique. Um, think through that, right? Like actually um, think through that because I bet you it's not as bland as you think. And if it is, then ask yourself, "W- if I'm like constrained in this way and I'm not doing interesting work, what do you want to do? Right. And those are the kinds of questions that can start to spur uh, the self discovery that you need in order to develop the themes that you'll want to put in your personal statement. All right. Are there additional questions here? It doesn't look like there's additional questions. I will say, if you do have questions, or you watch this later, and something comes up, service@gurufi.com. Shoot me a question. Always happy to answer it. Um, and again, just to recap the main ideas here, think of yourself as a storyteller when you write your personal statement. This is not a CV. We do CV revisions, and they're fundamentally different. The people who work on CVs in our company don't do personal statements and vice versa because they're two completely different things. And so you need to understand that your personal statement will move the needle or not to the degree that you have a story that people care about. And using kind of the tips and the ideas that we covered here can help move you in that direction. Um, all right. I hope that you guys found this useful, especially for people who don't necessarily have an extensive writing background. Um, and that as you approach the personal statement process, that you keep your favorite movies in mind, whatever those might be, so that you can write a really dynamite personal statement that gets you where you're trying to go. All right. Um, everyone have a great rest of their morning and visit us at gurufi.com. I'll see you guys later.